don't need to come from a powerhouse. We urge you to affirm.
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 I affirm.
You don't need private coaches. And you don't need to qualify to the TOC. You have no reason but to negate.
Negate.
A lot of hard work to get you here. Is everybody ready?
Hello and welcome back to the Former Partners podcast. As always, I am Lucas.
And I'm Quentin.
And we are glad to be back.
It has been a while. We apologize for that.
Yeah, we've been moving. We've been making moves.
Big moves.
Lots of movements happening.
Moves, side moves, up moves, forward moves.
YY no scope moves.
Yeah. I haven't heard that phrase in so long.
Yeah, it's coming back.
Modern Warfare 2.
Because it's being remade, but that's not what we're talking about today.
We should talk about that sometime.
Yeah, we will. What we're talking about today is the fact that we have a new website.
We do have a new website, CandorDebate.com. Same website name, but it's rebuilt.
Yeah, it looks real good.
You don't have to wait for an email from me anymore to receive your brief.
Shout out to our boy for redesigning that.
Yep. You can buy subscriptions on there. They're downloadable from the website once you do. And even though the season has already started, buying a subscription now, while we're still in the September-October topic, is still worth it. You'll still receive the same briefs as you would any other time. So go ahead and do that if you've been thinking about it. We've got good prices. We've got good setups for the subscriptions for the year.
Please buy them.
Please.
You don't have to, but if you did, we'd really appreciate it.
It would be awesome.
And it would help us keep making this. And if you like this, that's the best way you can support us.
Yeah. Purchase the stuff that we do. We don't make any money from this podcast, so.
Also, we have a mobile app.
Recency.
We've talked about it a few times before, and there were some like alpha beta versions that kind of went up and down as we were fighting with the App Store. But now, if you have an iPhone, unfortunately not on Android yet.
Not yet.
We have the full Recency app launched and available that can help you with
It's just a
research.
timer app right now.
It's just a timer app right now? I thought I also had research.
We're trying to get that passed. That's the part that we're having issues with.
Really?
With the App Store, yeah. But either way, I mean, the timer is different than any other timer that is on the App Store.
Yeah, that's the CandorDebate timer.
Yeah.
So you'll be
great.
a cool kid if you have it.
Yeah, and it works super well. It's a free app, obviously. Check it out. Recency by CandorDebate Co. Only on iPhone. We're working on everything else right now, but yeah.
Okay.
Now, for all the stuff that you're probably actually listening for, we're talking about the Public Forum Resolution for September-October resolved. The European Union should join the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, to start things off, we need to talk about just in general, what is BRI? Essentially, it's a Chinese initiative to build infrastructure and trade corridors throughout really the whole continent. You know, Eurasia.
Almost the whole world, because it's like 152 countries.
Yeah, but it's really through it's sort of a physical thing. They're literally building roads as part of it. So they're mainly focusing on Eurasia, like Asia, Africa, up to Europe. And obviously, we're kind of focusing on the Europe to China.
Well, I mean, that explains the European Union focus and the topic itself.
Yeah. It's a trade. It's a trade thing. It's money.
It's a weird topic to have should in front of, since it's about trade policy and just the logistics of instituting an international policy like this.
It's a weird one to have kids from America debate.
Yeah, because it doesn't actually have a lot of relevance to Americans and American citizenry. So it's actually going to be kind of hard to get. I think that
with the lay judges, it's going to be weird.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to get them interested in listening. You're going to have to try to find a pretty good AGD for linking it to Americans.
You just have to explain to them to weigh it as if they are the European Union instead of America. You know?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that there are some spiderweb links that you could make about how America and China are, each other's largest trade partners.
Right.
So if Chinese development increases, American development naturally is going to increase.
We're supposed to be buddies with the EU, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but that's not what the topic's about.
No.
and that's what's going to make it hard to relate to.
Yeah. So whenever we talk about the BRI and what it is, one thing important to note is the topicality idea of like what is topical, because whenever we're talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, we need to know what is under that. And part of the problem with that is, since the BRI has been China's largest effort, largest initiative of really any kind in a while, a lot of different things are being put under that umbrella to add legitimacy to them. Like, things that aren't actually BRI are being called BRI projects just to make it sound better, that kind of thing. And so in this brief that we released, we do have a topicality argument about BRI projects that pretty much just explains that the only thing that's actually BRI are the things that are officially stated by the Chinese government in high-level documents, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so if there wasn't a decision made by a committee
Right.
to make that project happen, and that project doesn't have BRI specifically in it somewhere, it's not actually a BRI project.
Yeah, the evidence itself, Hillman 18 says, the BRI's loose, ever-expanding nature and a lack of project transparency have led many observers to exaggerate its size. It also talks about how, where is that? Yeah, most scholars examine the BRI at a high level, evaluating Chinese official statements and documents. And even more specifically, those that underscore China's broader economic and foreign policy objectives. So really what we talk about this for is so that, one, you can tighten the scope on BRI because it is a huge thing.
Well, yeah, because the fact that it pertains to 150 plus countries around the world is already going to make the scope of the debate huge for potential of what both sides can bring up in terms of harms and benefits.
Yeah.
So anything that can limit the scope, like you just said, is going to be beneficial to both the pro and con on the topic.
And really where this comes in is the fact that there is no official definitions of what qualifies as a BRI project. And the card also says there are Chinese-funded projects in countries not participating in the BRI that share many of the same characteristics. The BRI was officially launched in 2013, but projects started years earlier are often counted. So the issues that come with that, you know, in the normal real world, when people talk about BRI, when China's talking about BRI, it's not really an issue to have these things that are sort of BRI, sort of not.
Yeah.
But for this debate, if you're debating BRI, you need to know what actually is a BRI project.
Well, yeah, because that's going to stop the con from lumping failed projects that were not actually BRI, that look like BRI, onto the pro as harms. And it's also going to stop the pro from having to, or it's going to stop the pro from being able to bring up things from before 2013 that have already been tried and true successes
that weren't actually BRI.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to help both sides a little bit again.
Yeah, and really, this argument will give you that area to focus on so that, you know, if you're pro, you can say, listen, that was awful. China shouldn't have done that, but it wasn't BRI. And pro can say, or con can say, yeah, that was successful. That was great for China. That wasn't BRI, though.
Exactly.
So that you actually debate BRI. And, you know, it's difficult to, in the evidence, to find anything that says, hey, listen, this is a high-level Chinese document. It says BRI. This is officially a BRI project. It's hard to find that evidence, and it's rarely going to be there. So really, you can use this card just to say, if something sounds a little wonky, if something sounds like maybe iffy, is that really a BRI project? Just read this card to be like, hey, this might not actually be a BRI project because of the nature of what BRI is. A lot of things that aren't BRI have been taken and called BRI.
Yeah, I think that follows. And I don't see any problem with making that distinction yourself as the debater, since there is no official definition available. Merriam-Webster, Black's Law, nobody's put out a definition. The Chinese government hasn't said this is specifically what these projects always look like, no matter what. So it's an important distinction to make. I would say.
I agree. We put it in there for a reason. I think it's something that's worth noting, especially in those debates where, when you get to a higher level, debates either are all stock arguments, the staple ones,
Mm-hmm.
in this trade environment, that sort of thing, or at the higher level, they get super out there with crazy stuff.
Like really niche arguments. Yeah.
Which I like, but it only works if they fit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yeah,
only,
you have to be able to show the link.
and it's only cool if it's real, if it's not BS. So this is kind of a check to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel it.
So the next thing, just an in general thing, is talking about the necessity of the EU with BRI. In most instances, not all of them, Pro is going to say yes, the EU is necessary for BRI to be legitimate, for BRI to succeed, because the EU is a funding source, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And Con's going to say the other way. Con's going to say no, everything's still going to happen, the EU isn't necessary. Or in some instances, Con is going to say the EU is necessary to make BRI legitimate, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
BRI being legitimate is bad because BRI is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of evidence on that, or a better way to say that is there's a lot of pro evidence that says it is necessary and a lot of con blocks against it.
Mm-hmm. But regardless, I think it's important for you to pick a side on that issue for your side, because if Pro can't show that the EU is actually a necessity for BRI to be successful, that doesn't necessarily take them out of the round, because it's about whether the EU should or should not join the BRI. But it definitely adds a lot of legitimacy to the claim that they should join if them joining makes it a lot more successful.
Right, if it makes it more successful and more beneficial for them.
Especially if it's necessary.
Again, that's where that weird part of the resolution comes in, where it's like, how are we weighing this? Are we weighing this as what's best for the EU? Is that how we should do it?
Or are we weighing it about what's best for all countries involved in BRI? Yeah, that's a good point.
What's morally good for everybody? Or what is, where does the scale tip for the EU versus the rest of the world? Like, what is the weighing system?
I mean, I would assume that you would have to pull util almost every time, just because for the length of the rounds in public forum, doing anything else is just going to become convoluted.
Yeah.
You're going to have to qualify every one of your arguments with a value criterion. This isn't Lincoln Douglas.
Yeah. But see, the issue with that is like util for everybody in the world. Because why, if the EU joining BRI is great for the EU but bad for everybody else, why would the EU not?
Yeah.
It's just tough. It's weird. And it's going to be one of those things that's going to be hard to portray to the judge. Because unless your judge is an immigrant from wherever in the EU and they know about this stuff and they can connect to the issue and put themselves really in the European Union's shoes, like how are you going to do that?
Because realistically, if we're talking outside the resolution, I don't think there's any necessity for the EU to join it. Yeah. They are totally capable of continuing to have economic progress like they have been. So without the BRI, does the EU crumble? Absolutely not. Without BRI, does China get mad at the EU and declare war? No.
Right. And the EU has their own sort of BRI, the EU connectivity plan, which we'll talk about later when we get to con arguments. They have their own version of BRI. So why would they join? It's so, I don't like the topic. How about I just say that?
Yeah,
I don't think we've had any topics that I really liked.
Yeah, no, we haven't had any that are about nukes, so I've not been interested.
Yeah. But yeah, so the necessity argument, it's up to you, really. There's evidence for both. It's an easy argument to win.
You should really, I think you should focus on the necessity argument in tying it into one of the pro arguments that we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
So find a direct benefit that is unique to the European Union joining
or
BRI.
However you're weighing.
Yeah. Find a direct benefit that is unique to the European Union joining BRI.
Right.
And then put that up against the EU necessity. Yeah. Like, this benefit only happens if they join BRI, therefore it is a necessity for them to join BRI, so they should.
I mean, that's entry-level stuff, but yeah. I mean, I think...
Well, yeah, but this is the first topic of the year, so we have to assume that some of the people listening to this have never debated before.
Exactly, and if that's the case, like, that is absolutely what your approach should be, but some of you probably already knew to kind of take that approach. Now, the next thing with EU necessity, or sort of an underlying thing with that. Whenever Khan says no, the EU is not necessarily, that brings up the idea of inevitability with the BRI. Essentially, if the EU doesn't join, Khan's going to say, in these instances where the EU is not a necessity, that BRI is inevitable. No matter what happens, BRI is still going to be put in place. It's still going to continue, that sort of thing. So in this brief, in Candor Briefs, there is a card that pretty much explains that China will and is going to, China has been and will continue to tap into any source of funding possible, including their public sector. They've already been doing that. 90% of the funding for BRI infrastructure projects are coming from the public sector right now. So EU joins, they get funding, they can move some money around. EU doesn't join, they continue what they're doing. Either way, BRI is going to happen.
Yeah.
And that is where, either pro or con can use this inevitable argument to de-link from things. So a really good example of this, and we'll get a little bit more specific whenever we start talking about more arguments, but let's say that the pro is talking about, the EU is a necessity to BRI, and BRI has this impact in this other country. Let's just say Africa.
Yeah.
BRI does this great thing in Africa once the EU joins and makes it legitimate. Khan can say, no, look, there's all these harms to the EU joining BRI, and BRI is inevitable, so even if the EU doesn't join, these benefits to Africa still occur, but without all the harms to EU, so the EU shouldn't join.
Yeah.
And that's how you use that inevitability argument to de-link, or whatever you want to call it, to get out of these arguments. I will say there's also blocks to inevitability, saying that inevitability, it's not inevitable. An answer to China taking money out of the public sector and putting money in however they can.
Gotcha.
There's some good blocks to it. So that's a couple options there just for general stuff. So do we just move into pro?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. If you want to go ahead and really, I mean, the big one is trade and economy.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Belt and Road Initiative is about creating trade routes, essentially. And its core, that's what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
It's, hey, this town actually is producing a lot of steel, or this town's actually producing a lot of corn. Or could. Yeah. And even though they could be doing that, or they are doing that, it can't go anywhere because they don't have a maritime access port. They don't have a port. They don't have road access.
Literal roads.
Yeah. The only way to get cargo out of there is in small planes or something like that. Again, because they don't have a large commercial airstrip either. So China says, hey, you could be making a lot of money. We could be lifting you out of this third world status.
Yeah.
You could enter an industrial age. Let us help you do that. And that's where you're going to get all of these should type arguments for the EU, because even though a lot of the European Union is developed, they're already past their industrial age and they already have these types of access points, it still stands to reason that if they go and help other countries that don't have it develop, that then there's going to be more people who can trade.
Right.
And when there are more people who can trade, there's just more goods, more money going around.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah. And if the EU was one of the contributors to them being able to trade, you could then assume that they're going to also trade with the EU once they can trade.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think something that a lot of people don't realize, and I may be making it a bigger thing than it actually is, but BRI would help with every country within the EU trading. Because, just looking at geographically the way the continent is set up, if China builds this BRI route or a corridor straight through from China to Europe, that can also connect Europe with a lot of other places that they aren't currently connected to.
Yeah, not to mention, since it's the literal development of roads rather than exclusive trade routes and the like,
Right.
There's also potential benefits related to tourism.
Yeah.
There's just safe travel benefits. The fact that you can now go to these places without dying on the way because there's a road there, as opposed to you just having to, trek it to the wilderness.
Yeah. And the point of this is to say BRI itself, or the end goal of BRI itself, really has no harms to it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing bad about having more options for trade, more connectivity.
Now we're talking about this more, and I think I'm realizing more and more why you think it was weird that they picked the European Union for an actor in this resolution, because really, it doesn't matter if it's the European Union or anybody else joining, for that matter. The resolution could have been left at should anybody support the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I get why they had to choose somebody.
Yeah.
I just think that there was better ways to set this up to be debated. But anyway,
would the European Union joining the Belt and Road Initiative be beneficial?
Yeah,
that would be a better topic.
Right, exactly. And I get the European Union being the agent or the actor in this because they're really the only one in that area that hasn't taken a stance yet.
Well, and I guess because you spoke about geography earlier, and I'm thinking about it a bit more. If the European Union decided to come out as strongly opposed to BRI, they could shut down a lot of those land routes because there are no direct land routes from China to Africa without going through Europe.
Yeah, the way it's set up, it really, like, I get where the resolution comes from. I just think it could have been worded better.
I think it's that should that's killing me more than anything else.
How do you make this like a moral obligation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a couple ways to do it, actually.
Yeah.
You brought up a really great one in relation to some technological developments in Africa.
Yeah, which I think is one of the next things we're talking about. But in general, the underlying pro side is going to be a lot of trade, economy. And that is one thing that you can kind of connect to a judge. Like, even in America, global trade is good no matter what, no matter where you live.
Well, yeah, because if X is a hot commodity and it's trading at a really high price right now because there's not a lot of it going around, but then EU invests in BRI and that brings the price of that commodity down because now more countries are producing it, and not only are they producing it, but they can actually move it, then that's beneficial to everyone, not just the EU, not just the United States.
Right. And so, like, one of these cards that I'm talking about, CandorDebate19, pretty much says that trade in goods between China and other BRI countries reached $1.3 trillion US in 2018, up 16% from the year before.
16%?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so connect that with EU, and then just like those overflow benefits that reach the rest of the world, including the United States. These are things that you can, through a lot of links, connect back to a judge in Missouri or whatever,
Yeah, well, and I think that we might have lost some of our listeners at this point because we're talking about a lot of economics and trade, even though the resolution has the word should in it, which is more about ethics and morality, whether or not from a moral perspective they should join this.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to remember that when a country, regardless of where it is, regardless of how well off they already are or how poorly they're doing at the moment, when they experience economic gain, it does result in a quality of life increase for its citizenry, and that ultimately is a morally good thing to decide to do,
Yes, it is.
especially from the perspective of a governmental organization such as the European Union. Because that's one of the only things they can do to actually benefit their citizens is to make good trade agreements.
Yeah. And so I'm sure if you're listening to this, if you're putting the effort in to listen to a podcast about a debate topic, you've probably heard the stock argument about trade and economy. So let's move on from that a little bit. One of the ones that I really like is science and research. It's a little bit out there. It's pretty unique. So this first card, for example, RUSI-19, science and research are a major pillar of BRI. This combats brain drain and a lack of support for research in Europe.
I love it because brain drain is, that's just super common for bringing up as a detriment of any plan.
Yeah.
I think that finding ways to combat that, regardless of if your country's benefiting from the brain drain, is still beneficial for everybody.
Yeah. And, just to clarify, like we were talking about that topicality argument, BRI projects, this is the president of China saying that a key part of building the overall project is scientific cooperation with these BRI countries, with China. The card says countries have battled brain drain, persistent corruption, and lack of support for research and development. In this region, Chinese companies are, among other projects, building a bridge. So that's phenomenal with anything in research. I mean, like, whenever you talk about research, countries working together on big research or any research really is so phenomenal just because of how research happens.
Yeah, you never know what may be born out of that cooperation.
Right.
I mean, you look at NASA, when post-World War II, we started claiming scientists from Germany and other afflicted countries from the war, and they started pumping out, what was it, microwaves, Velcro,
so much
stuff that we use daily now that we never would have
Right.
considered was a result of cooperation for science research or scientific research between countries.
Yeah, even if, you know, these new research partnerships don't find the cure for cancer, whatever, even if the biggest thing they do is quality of life improvements,
It's still something.
that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, it'll be really awesome from a perspective of brain drain bad
Yeah.
that it's going to help eliminate some of the animosity that comes with brain drain.
Right.
The whole doctors coming or people coming from India to become doctors, and then once they're done with their schooling, they go back and people are like, oh, they went to school here, they should have worked here and used those skills to help Americans.
Right.
So now that doesn't happen because they can do the research there. They can have a road, so maybe somebody will build a school and they can go to school there.
Yeah.
And then they can immediately take that information, go right back into their community and start helping people around them that they grew up around, they know.
Exactly. And that's on the brain drain front, but even on the research like front of it, this next card in the brief, Van der Weyne and Deason 2019, says BRI is having a profound impact on international research partnerships. I'll just read this because it's worded better than I could even explain it in my own words. The new Sino-European science initiatives are bolstering research I'm just going to start that over. The new Sino-European science initiatives are bolstering research collaboration. More than 36% of China's research publications now also include an international co-author. Chinese researchers are increasingly collaborating with researchers abroad. The Belt and Road Initiative seems to have had a profound impact on bilateral research partnerships. So that right there is really all the proof you need that like real things are happening because of BRI in this instance of, or in this area of science and research.
Yeah, and it's just tremendous because you never know. It's kind of like that cheesy thing about the cure for cancer might be locked in the mind of a child who can't go to school.
Right.
And even though it's a little cheesy, and it's meant to just make people kind of think about it, it's true.
Yeah.
There might be a kid who is being forced to work coal mines in Africa right now that if he went to school, he has the potential to go and create the next space shuttle engine that's going to allow us to go to Mars.
Yeah. And BRI itself could
facilitate
bring
that
out.
Yeah.
But even, right now, something huge could be stuck in the mind of a researcher that is in Europe.
And he's already working on it, but he's hit a
needs
wall.
And grouping up with somebody from China, that sort of
Who's
partnership.
Like, well, have you looked at it this way? And then that creates the next breakthrough.
Right. Imagine if the two best researchers in these prospective areas in Asia and in Europe.
It's kind of like building your scientific all-star team.
Exactly. This is the Olympic basketball team, of research.
Yeah.
Except it's, that wasn't a great example, actually.
No, I mean, it's a decent
you know
example. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome because the same thing does happen in sports. So it's a wonder that it's taken us that long to start doing it in science.
And even if that's not the case in the rest of the world, the rest of the world is pretty good at making that bridge of research. But China has kind of been an outlier for a while.
Well, I mean, you also have to consider with China up until the 70s, 80s, there's a pretty good reason why they weren't very interactive with the outside world.
Right. And it may actually be a European thing. It's hard to tell if it's China has separated themselves in the research area or if it's been Europe. But
well, China has separated up until like 1970, 1980 area. China has separated themselves from the whole world on everything because of really tyrannical leadership.
Right. So in this card, it also gives the example of Latvia, a European country. Since 2013, when BRI was enacted and this new research happened, these new research partnerships started, they've seen an increase of 62% in publications that include like a Chinese author as well.
That's cool.
That's huge. So yeah, I think that this is the smallest part of the brief. It's just some links, I guess, from BRI to international research, but you can find insane impacts to this.
Well, and you can extrapolate with that small link alone. Just that's one of those that you can kind of give the judge the basic building blocks to the arguments and just kind of let their mind go.
Right.
Especially if they seem to be a scientifically inclined person.
Yeah.
If you're telling them, hey, this is causing a butt ton of new research collaboration projects, think about what's happened in the past when we've done that.
Right.
That's all you have to say.
Yeah.
And then their mind's going to start wandering towards artificial intelligence, full automation of production lines, all sorts of crazy things that
Whatever
are almost
they think is
infeasible
good.
for a single country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, their mind is going to run with it. I think it's a great argument, or at least the start of a great argument.
But then for specific technologies that have been birthed out of this already and that are being pushed with the BRI, I think this one's really awesome. We were talking about it before we started the podcast, and it's the African child registration.
Yeah, so part of the issue in Africa and Southeast Asia is that they don't have really any sort of technology. I mean, certain areas do.
Yeah, it's like hotspots, but it's mostly what we would consider to be beyond rural in America.
Oh, yeah. That they don't, they have no access to internet or anything like that. Part of BRI is building the infrastructure for internet connectivity across this entire region. 5G, but it's specifically blockchain. Now, where this impact comes in is the fact that there are like 115 million people in Africa that don't have access to social services, either because they don't have access to, connect to that sort of thing, or
they don't have a landline to call and ask for it. They don't have an internet. They don't have access to internet to email and get their account set up or anything.
Yeah. Or on the other hand, they're not even technically a citizen because they, the social services aspect is so lacking in these areas that when they were born, nobody notated it, nobody knew.
Well, there may not even be a road to their village.
Exactly. So,
or their town, whatever it is.
So they don't have a birth certificate and they have no access to these social services because technically they're not a person,
At least in the eyes of the government.
On paper. So what this means is that with this infrastructure from BRI, with this blockchain technology specifically, it'll help 115 million people in Africa access important social services by helping register them as official citizens. That's Keenan 18. And even further stuff, India had the same issue, and then they got the same technology. It helps with child registration. And child registration is important because, like the Independent 17, young people without IDs can be forced into child marriages, military service, or the labor market illegally. But without some sort of identification, if you're not in the system,
there's no backlash.
Right. There's nothing that anybody can do. Even if I'm the authorities and I know that you're 14 and you're getting married to a 35-year-old, I know this, but there's nothing I can do about it because there's no proof.
Yeah, there's no paper that says you're 14.
Right.
That is recognized by an official government organization.
Yeah. So without a birth certificate or anything, nobody can fight this kind of thing. So that's where this argument comes in, where this is one of those impacts that reaches really far out into what BRI is and what BRI does, but it's huge. It's super important.
Well, and I think that this one is going to weigh really heavily on the should issue.
Right.
This isn't just an economic benefit that you can try to say would happen regardless of if anybody did BRI, because economies are just going to grow and people are going to make more money. This is quite literally stopping people from going into sex trafficking. This is stopping children from being child soldiers.
And this is Coney 2012 kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. This is how we prevent what's been happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo for the last, 40 years from continuing to happen.
Exactly.
Or at least, maybe not preventing, but at least starting to stop it.
Yeah.
It's a great step in the right direction.
Beginning step to fighting this kind of thing. And, this is the example that I was using earlier whenever we were talking about inevitability, though. So let's say I'm pro and I run this child African registration argument. I say, listen, this doesn't really do anything for the EU, but they have the moral obligation to join the BRI because this leads to these children getting access to social services.
And anything that can speed that along should be done.
Yeah. Exactly. So then if I'm Con and I hear this argument, I say, listen, BRI is inevitable. BRI is going to happen no matter what. So this African child registration argument is non-unique.
Well, I think all I have to do then as pro is just say, but with the EU joining, like, it may be non-unique, but with the EU joining, it makes it happen faster, and that's where you tie into should.
And that's whenever you get into those really cool debates where you're like actually weighing real things.
And you're talking about a time frame too, which is rarely used in public forum.
Right.
Public forum is almost always from the perspective of you're kind of signing a legislation at the end of the round as the president or whatever.
Right.
And no, this is saying like, no, this is a time frame issue.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun argument in the sense that it's unique and the impacts. You know, there are real numbers, there are real like things that you can kind of put yourself in the shoes of these people and think like, should the EU do this?
And then that one couples very easily with the scientific research evidence that there's these 115 million undocumented people in Africa that could all be contributing much more to scientific and technological fields than they are, and they might want to be even, and they can't.
And you know, it's funny, if they're undocumented, how do we know that there's 115 million of them? That's,
that's a good question. I hadn't even considered that.
It's talking about how, like,
is it just using like population densities that currently exist in estimations, kind of?
Yeah, it says according to UNICEF, 2 out of 3 infants are not registered with the government at birth, and 3 out of 4 kids don't have birth certificates.
So they just multiply the number of registered by
so
that.
They just like look at like based on this, percentage. Like if this is the standard, then this is probably about where we're at.
Okay.
So it could be more, could be a little bit less, but generally,
well, I mean, if it's one kid that you're helping, then that's a benefit.
Yeah.
You only need to help one person to create a moral obligation to help one person.
Right. And that's what, is it util? Interesting. What if there's harms though, Lucas?
I mean, show me the harms.
We'll talk about them.
Okay.
Actually, we can move into that now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the last thing we wanted to cover on pro for this one anyway.
Yeah. There's also, just so you know in the brief, there are other blocks and stuff. We're not going to go super deep into them, but everything that we're talking about, there are answers to it. There are front lines on the other side. And there are arguments that kind of lay out how to make these links into larger arguments.
Yeah, so basically, if you end up getting our brief, you're getting the argument itself, a block to it, a block to that block, and then a block to that block.
Yeah.
On top of that, you're getting 4 steps down the line on almost every line of argumentation that we mention.
Every card that we cut, we try to find an answer to it and then an answer to that. But yeah, so that's the fun pro stuff that I like. On con, we have the general. We can talk about the debt trap stuff. Debt trapping is just in general when China, talks to these countries that need assistance and says, listen, you should join BRI. Here's the terms. And they make these terms insane. And then they make these BRI countries give China money for BRI.
Is it kind of like the bonds issue that occurred between China and the U.S.?
Sort of. It's
where
similar.
They owe us like $750 billion right now.
Yeah, except the other way around.
Yeah.
They kind of trick these countries into owing them insane amounts of money.
Okay.
That's a typical con argument. There's not much about it in the brief, if any. What I like talking about is the environment arguments. Now, whenever you're talking about environment on con, the way to frame it is that, if we're looking at like terminal impacts, we need to limit emissions to stop the temperature rise to the normal 2% or 2 degrees Celsius limit that's emphasized by the Paris Climate Summit, all that stuff. Whenever you're con, you're going to say that the BRI projects actually threaten like hitting this limit because the BRI projects are hurting the environment in a lot of ways. Some of these ways, like for example, Hilton 19, China is financing outdated coal plants in host countries. Something like 240 coal projects in 25 of the BRI countries. New coal capacities in Egypt, Tanzania, Zambia,
I believe.
Many are less advanced or not being planned with the carbon capture technology that would make them less threatening to efforts to control climate change. Essentially, China is like helping them with energy, but in the worst way possible.
Yeah.
They told them like, we're going to help you get more electricity, more energy in your country, and then gave them like the worst option. But it's good to them, but it hurts the rest of the world.
So I'm asking myself a question right now.
Yeah.
Would those resources that these people are now able to use, that they couldn't use before, would they have been used eventually anyway by somebody else? Would somebody have come in and mined that coal out and used it for themselves, like the U.S. or a European country, in the long run anyway?
Yeah. I'm not sure. That's a weird argument to make. I get why you make it.
Well, because there's been there's lots of evidence to support the strip mining in Africa that rather than anybody going in and doing something like BRI, where they develop the infrastructures and let the countries process these resources themselves. They just go in and make backdoor deals with the governments to strip mine crap loads of the resources, take them home, and process them that way.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't really know, but I think part of the issue is that, like, China obviously has the option of good energy.
Well, yeah, everybody does.
And they're built. They have the.
We've had green energy projects ready to go for over a decade, but the investment has just not been there.
Yeah, the investment hasn't been there, which China has. China has the investment money.
Oh yeah, they have haven't they surpassed us GDP wise at this point?
I have no idea.
I'm pretty sure. Like I think we are somewhere around I think they do like 1.6 trillion and we do like 1.3.
Maybe
or something like that.
That sounds like it could be right.
It kind of, I don't know, because then you have to weigh deficits against it and other things, and then
But even in the sense that like countries are giving them so much money for BRI specifically, and what they're choosing to do with that money when they have the money. And part of the reason that I think renewables aren't used as much is because we already have all this old technology. We have coal plants that it would be hard to turn those into, renewable plants, right?
Well, yeah, you can't turn a coal plant into a renewable plant, but you can take the money you've made from the coal plant, build a renewable plant, close the coal plant, and then put all your employees from there at the renewable plant.
Right, but
so that's a lot of retraining. Yeah. It is a lot of cost.
Yeah, and
at the end of the day, there's no way around that.
Like obviously, I think we should be focusing on renewables in any chance we get, but I kind of get why, like, at least right now with all of our non-renewable energy, like it's hard to switch to that. But China is building new coal plants.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there, that we finally have this technology and we have an area where it has untapped resources. They don't have energy infrastructure built yet. So we could be doing it the right way.
China could be doing it.
China could be doing it the right way, and they're choosing not to.
Yeah,
they're trying to take the more cost-effective route rather than paying the extra buck to put in solar plants, hydroelectric plants, thermal energy.
It is beneficial to these countries that didn't have this energy infrastructure in the first place, that didn't have these coal plants.
But then it's also detrimental to them because they didn't have the pollution that's associated with the coal plants.
Exactly.
They didn't have the waste that's associated with production of coal.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's a huge environment argument because that's a bad thing. Coal plants just in general are bad.
Well, they're also good though, because like you just said, this is a hard one because you're talking about somewhere that might not have electricity, might not have running water, might not have anywhere that has either of those things for hundreds of miles.
Yeah.
So you go in and you build a coal plant and you start making money. You build an electric plant that's powered by that coal plant. You build a water processing facility that's powered by that coal plant. Those are all benefits.
Yeah.
But it still was done on the back of dirty energy.
Exactly. And, I want to be careful because we kind of are like grouping all of these different places into one, like undeveloped.
It's not to say that every single country that's affected by the BRI is an undeveloped third world country or less.
No running water or whatever. But
but that's the places that are going to be the most affected by a type of infrastructure development, which is why that's where we're focusing our arguments.
That those new coal plants, as bad as they are going to have the biggest impact.
Well, and who needs it more?
Exactly.
A country where 80% of the citizens don't have access to clean water, or one that does.
Yeah, but it is important to note that some of these countries, like Egypt, not an undeveloped country.
Not at all.
But it's still being built there. So, I guess whenever I say that coal plants are bad, I mean as opposed to renewable energy.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I try to take the distinction into this situation because, like you said, we don't want to lump these things together.
Right.
And there are a lot of things to qualify when you're talking about what is good and bad in terms of energy.
Yeah, and so really, like, I'm just talking about just to make the distinction, again, China has the opportunity and the money and the option to start these countries that don't have energy infrastructure or have lacking energy infrastructure to start them on a renewable path. And greatly impact like both their lives by giving them energy, but also by getting this region like into a fully renewable state. And they're just choosing to go coal plant route.
And if it was 10 years ago, I would say, well, there's no proof that green energy works.
Right.
So you can't come up here and tell me it's better. But there is proof now.
Yeah.
There are countries like Germany that it's like 60% of all their power produced is green now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
want to say it was Luxembourg. It's Luxembourg or Sweden. One of the others is all like 80% or higher. Something stupid. They now are importing trash as opposed to like because they don't have any more trash to get rid of because they're using their trash in power production.
Dope.
I think it's like a plasma gasification
That's
type
super
issue.
sweet.
Yeah. So they're literally buying other countries' excess garbage now to help produce energy because they just can. They have the ability to.
See, why aren't we doing that? But
Yeah,
anyway,
because we're dumb.
yeah. So yeah, China has the option to be doing good things, and they're not. Now, the block to this, if you pro, is you bring up that China has said, we have these environmental promises that we've made. We are going to be, like China said, we're going to be focusing more on renewables now. And this brings up the idea of like, pro is going to be able to say, listen, BRI is good because now they're focusing on renewables. Con is saying BRI is not good because they've been focusing on coal. Who wins in this instance whenever these inevitably clash in a debate round?
So
I know what I think. I want to hear what you think.
So when you have a actual harm versus a potential benefit is essentially the situation we're encountering because China has agreed to be part of different green energy initiatives that are going to take place over the next 20, 30 years or whatever. They're going to try to start revamping that. So we can hope that then the same thing will occur in these countries where they're currently developing coal, dirty energy.
In the EU, if they were to join.
Exactly, yeah. So we can hope that that's what's going to happen. But what's actually happening is they're building coal plants. Right now, they're building coal plants.
Right.
And right now, that's bad.
Yeah.
And since public forum is a type of debate that's so, where timescale is so important, I think that the con is probably going to walk away victorious on this one because they can go, you can make as many promises as you want, but China's carbon footprint has only been increasing as long as they've been industrialized. Yeah. And there's nothing that proves that that's going to stop.
Right. If I go to my neighbor's house and I say, hey, can I hang out in your forest or in the woods for a little bit? And I cut down all their trees. And I go to my next neighbor and I say, hey, can I hang out? And I cut down all their trees. And everybody starts to notice. And then I go to my next neighbor and they say, no, you're going to cut down all my trees. And I say, no, I'm not. Who said I was going to do that? I promise I'm not going to. But every house I've been to, I've cut down all the trees. I'm probably going to cut down the trees.
Yeah, it's also more of a road to hell, paved with good intentions situation.
Exactly. Like, we have to look at the status quo, and the status quo is in 100% of these countries they've built coal plants.
Well, and what's going to win the argument at the end of the day is posterity or greed going to drive these developers at the end. Once they've started making these massive profits off of coal plants, like they know they can because everybody's been doing it for hundreds of years at this point.
Yeah, it's a huge industry.
Are they going to then be like, wow, I made a whole bunch of money. You know what I could do? I could not make as much money and do clean energy.
Yeah.
No, they're gonna double down and they're gonna make more coal plants because they can make more money.
Especially when this whole thing is built on economic growth.
Yeah.
So yeah, all of this is to say, inevitably at some point you're going to hit con versus pro, both talking about environment.
And to tie that back into the resolution directly, the European Union as a government should not join an initiative that is going to have a detriment to the environment.
Exactly.
No country and that has that as a goal in mind. And it's kind of generally agreed upon that the environment is important.
Right.
Like, for the most part, people are like, yeah, we need to protect the environment.
Unless you're Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that we need to get political with it.
I'd love to get political with it.
I don't think we should. But unless you, for some reason, are a coal worshiper like we have in America, like the people that like to go out and use their gasoline-powered cars to block electric charging stations for cars.
Dope.
Have you seen that?
Mm-mm.
That happened.
No,
it's a problem they're having in California. Like, people with big F-250s, like huge trucks, are literally like getting together, and then they go to Tesla charging stations and they just block them.
Cool.
Because a form of protest, because gasoline needs to stay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Isn't it amazing?
Love those guys.
The cognitive dissonance that's occurring around the world right now in regards to energy.
Yeah.
So the whole point of what I'm getting at with this is that it's generally agreed upon, unless you're a member of the minority, that the environment is important.
Yeah.
And that saving the earth is important because we only have one of them right now.
Yeah, so far.
So far.
Yeah.
Elon Musk, I've got my fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So if you can prove that joining or that the BRI is going to cause more environmental harm than benefit, then that's a very easy point for you to be like, no, the EU should not join. BRI because it's going to hurt the planet, which in turn hurts everybody.
And especially if this is one of those rare instances where Khan says that the EU is necessary for BRI. So if you're Khan and you're saying, look, this environmental impact in the EU is necessary for BRI to continue, so if the EU joins, then all they're doing is continuing this degradation of the environment.
Then there's almost no way out for the affirmative team at that point.
Yeah. So, yeah, we say all this to say, in these instances that you're inevitably going to get into, if you debate this topic at a tournament of any kind, if you're Khan and you hit pro saying environment and you're also saying environment, in this toss-up of pro environment versus con environment, I think Khan wins every time.
Yeah, because it's actual harms versus potential benefits.
And just to put it in a nice little soundbite, of course I ruined the soundbite. Current real harms will always outweigh potential future benefits.
Yeah, for sure. And
in terms of weighing
from a policymaker's perspective, especially
in a debate round. Yeah, I agree.
When I say a policymaker, I don't want to mislead any of the novice debaters that might be listening out there. I'm not talking about policy debate. The judge in a public forum round is generally, if they're briefed the way that they are here in Missouri, are trying to kind of look at the round from the perspective of, like, let's say, in this instance, the leader of the European Union.
Right.
And they have two pieces. Well, they have a legislation on their desk that is the European Union decides to join BRI, and you're trying to convince them to sign it or not to sign it. Right. And that's what I'm talking about from a policymaker's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to look at it. Now, the next con argument, the one that I love, is private military companies.
Oh, yeah, this is a really phenomenal. Good. When you told me this argument, I was like, how are you going to find a link to this, Quentin? Show me the links. And then you showed me the links, and now I'm really excited because it makes me wish that we could go con every round on this topic.
Yeah, I did. I think it's great. So what the argument is first off, private military companies are essentially mercenaries. That's kind of making it a little too simple, but that's what they are.
Yeah.
They're foreign military of any kind that now work for a private company that sells out security services to anybody. Whether that be another country or a private force of some kind. Instead of it being the U.S. military, it's something like Blackwater, or in this instance, it's FSG. Now, the interesting thing is that FSG is owned by the guy who used to run Blackwater, Eric Prince.
Weird how that works.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Is it like a PMC shell company?
Sort of. I mean, no, Eric Prince sold Blackwater to a bunch of big important people.
Oh, like split it up?
Yeah, and then moved to China and started this company.
Wow.
So it's a security company, FSG is, and it has tied itself to China's Belt and Road Initiative to help secure this whole development process. So essentially, there's a couple of cards in here, Stevenson and Buckley 19, Thine August 2nd. Really what it is that this new private security company is just going to be working with China to make sure that this development, this infrastructure, wherever it is, through Eurasia, is secure.
Well, yeah, because there's loads of evidence to illustrate the fact that doing development projects without the proper security to protect them while they're being developed is useless.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about developments through Africa, developments through countries that are experiencing a load of instability where terrorism is running rampant. We definitely need to be able to prove that there's going to be some security there.
Right, exactly.
Because what's a better target than a brand new building or a brand new bridge?
Yeah, or whatever it's going to be. And on the surface, it sounds great. They say, great, we have security. This makes the whole thing seem more legitimate. The problem is private military companies are awful. And that's just really the gist of it.
Well, I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. I like the United States for the most part, and I really appreciate what our soldiers do overseas.
Right.
But even we're not perfect. We have a pretty high rate of abuse of our power when it comes to being overseas, and we're one of the best trained militaries in the world.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about private military companies, I can only imagine that it's 10 times worse.
Yeah, and see, the thing is, whenever you are a soldier for the military, whether that's the U.S. military,
there's
or China's
consequence.
Military, there is a chain of command. You have somebody to answer to. There are rules. Whenever you're a private contractor for a company that's been hired privately to do security, you don't really answer to anybody.
You can kind of ghost out too if you do anything wrong.
If things get bad, you just leave.
It's not like what is it called? Desertion with the U.S. military.
You can't go AWOL if you're an employee.
Yeah. And there's no military tribunal for
Right, exactly.
SFG or SFG?
FSG.
FSG.
Yeah.
My apologies.
And in general, for these private military companies, some countries do have like ways to hold them accountable, but for the most part, there's really nothing. And
Well, and how's a
especially if
mostly undeveloped country with probably a small
Exactly.
standing military itself supposed to do anything to a high-grade private military company?
yeah, and if I'm a small country, and I agree, like, and China is in my eyes helping me develop, and people that they've hired to secure it abuse my citizens, what am I going to do? Am I going to tell these people that are helping me develop, like,
Hey, stop this project.
yeah, exactly.
Because then my citizens are abused and I have empty promises.
Exactly.
And I'm out a bunch of money probably.
So I'm just going to scroll down some of these sections on private military companies. In general, they don't perform as well because they're not connected to the actual military. They're difficult to hold to accountability standards since their bottom line, the money, is above whatever mission they're on. They destabilize small states because they abuse locals. They create insurgencies. They make the government be seen as illegitimate. There are these private corporate entities influencing the decisions of actual governments and state actors. They don't have to pursue peaceful resolutions to anything that they're involved in. They abuse human rights. There's a bunch of examples of private military companies opening sex trafficking rings in the countries that they're there to secure.
Well, that was kind of one of the things I was hinting at earlier, is that even countries that are as developed as the United States have a pretty serious problem with sexual crimes committed by their military overseas, especially. Yeah. So I can only imagine that a PMC with less accountability, less oversight, is going to have even more problems of that nature.
Exactly.
And that's the last thing these people who are already struggling need.
Yeah. And this card really sums it up best. United Nations 2018, PMCs instigate summary executions, abductions, and sexual violence. This destabilizes the country and affects local populations. The lack of accountability allows contractors to violate human rights and international laws. All right there.
Boom.
And these are the people that China is hiring to help them do BRI projects. The EU should not be part of this from a moral standpoint, cannot support this kind of thing.
No, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. There's
that's your stance on con, at least.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot that can be said otherwise, because when it comes to PMCs, it's kind of a weird argument. A lot of things that you can bring up in debate have a lot of good, a lot of bad, and enough that it's kind of a wash, and it's just down to who debates it better.
Yeah.
This is one of those rare chances on con where there are very few instances of a PMC that did exactly what they were supposed to and did it perfectly correct.
Yeah. Now, there are blocks to this argument. There are pro responses to this.
But they're probably not great.
Oh, well, I mean, hey, don't say that. It's pretty good. But in general, private military companies, if you're running this on con, you're going to say the track record of private military companies in general, especially ones run by Eric Prince,
are not great.
So we say all this to say that this is there's a whole case in there's a con case just built entirely around private military companies that are linked to BRI. And I love it. Now, we've talked a lot about all these different con arguments, debt traps, environment, private military companies. With all this being said, we can see that there are a lot of harms to BRI for the EU to join. But inevitably, pro is going to bring up some good benefits to having better connectivity. This is where you bring in the alternative, the EU connectivity plan. This is something that I think is really good because your case can be set up essentially as here's a harm, here's a harm, here's a harm, and here's how we answer all the benefits.
So, as a really quick distinction to make, especially for the new debaters that might be listening, it is in everywhere that I'm familiar with, it's illegal to run a counter plan in public forum debate on the negative side.
Right.
A counter plan is where you present an alternative to the resolution, generally by changing the actor, changing the plan. In this instance, you're saying instead of changing the actor, which is the European Union, you're saying, no, don't do BRI, do EU connectivity plan.
Yep.
You cannot specifically go in there and say, hey, do this instead.
Yeah.
But what you can say is there are all other options that don't have the same harms and they have equal or greater benefits. And because those other options exist, that's why we should not do this.
Yeah.
You're not saying do it, but they exist. And you have to keep those things in mind when you're making these kinds of decisions. Just like
Right.
the leader of the EU would have to. If you were the sole leader of the EU, because I doubt that exists,
Yeah.
but if you were in this fictitious situation, if you're the sole leader of the EU and you have this legislation on your table of whether or not you guys are going to join the BRI and make these decisions, you would be informed on the concept of the EU connectivity plan existing beside of it.
Right.
It wouldn't not exist. So you having that information allows you to make an informed decision on it. And
Yeah.
that's essentially what you're doing is the negative in
It's-
this instance. You're helping the judge make an informed decision. You're not
It's
telling
an
him this is a
opportunity cost argument.
yeah, exactly. Like you're not saying this is a better choice to do this instead. You're saying there are other choices that are better. You need to consider that before saying yes.
Right, because you can't say vote con to enact the EU connectivity plan.
But you
You're
can
not-
say vote con to not enact the BRI because the EU connectivity plan exists.
Right, you're pretty much going to say like because just based on how public forum works, you vote pro, EU joins BRI. You can't say vote con, EU does EU connectivity plan. But what you can say is if you vote pro, EU connectivity plan is not an option anymore.
Generally, yeah.
So
And that's
where
not guaranteed. You could say that both happen,
Right.
but that is where you hopefully had some good harms specific to BRI
Right.
in your con case alongside of this alternative.
And you just run it as an opportunity cost.
Yep.
So some of the things about the EU connectivity plan, actually, one way you can run this first card in this section is that the EU connectivity plan helps reform the BRI. So you can even say that the EU connectivity plan is a precursor. So we shouldn't join BRI now. And if we don't, we can do this EU connectivity plan and then maybe eventually join BRI.
And that's where you can get into timeline again. Like you're saying, Judge, today you are making the decision right now for if the European Union is going to join BRI.
Yeah.
We're saying not yet. It's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing if we do it right now, but it might be a good thing in the future if we wait and figure some things out first.
And in public forum, it is scary to get specific. It is scary to go down that path, but just be careful with how you say it.
Yeah, again, you just can't come off as though you're saying do this instead, because you're
Right.
not saying do this instead. You're saying other things exist that can accomplish the same goal,
Yep.
probably without the same harms.
Yeah.
So don't join this, at least not right now, because these harms exist for sure, and there's also other things that could have the same benefits.
Yeah, and one of the great cards in this is Bratberg and Sula 18. EU connectivity plan solves for China's debt trap. So we were talking about those debt traps, and we were talking about the financing of the BRI and why it's so bad. This card says the EU seeks to establish a normative framework and rule book for connectivity projects with a strong emphasis on sustainability and respect for the rules-based international system. Another area where the EU seems keen to distance itself from BRI methods is financing. Brussels promotes multilateral arrangements that take debt sustainability into account and resorts to both public and private funding mechanisms. So really what this is saying is that in that idea of a precursor or an alternative, you can set this right next to the debt trap con argument and explain why this is a better alternative. There's a lot of
Again,
stuff
without
like
making the
that.
distinction that if you vote con, this is what's happening instead.
Yeah.
You always have to stick with the idea that if you're voting con, all you're doing is not saying that the EU should join the BRI.
And there is a way to say, because if you run this as an alternative, Pro can usually permit or something, say, BRI and EU connectivity plan.
Then you just have to have the unique detriments of the BRI, which is where you're going to pull your PMC's card, you're going to pull your environment cards, because there's a really good chance that the EU, which is already pushing green energy in a lot of their countries independently, let alone as a whole, is not going to go out and build coal plants.
Right. But even further, Cameron 18, the EU budget is crucial for the connectivity plan. The card pretty much explains that at least this next EU budget is crucial to allocating sufficient funds towar's the connectivity plan.
Oh, so
they
there's
can't
kind of
afford to do both.
You're showing that the bank account does have a limit with
Yeah,
that card,
At
and
least
that if
for the EU,
Yeah.
so they can either put money into joining BRI or put money into joining their own EU connectivity.
at least right this second.
Right. And then there's a bunch of benefits to the EU connectivity plan. I love it as just a final word on the con case.
Mm-hmm.
Really, you hit all the con arguments you want, all the detriments of BRI, and then say, listen, we can get all the benefits though our own way.
Yeah, because you can say on top of everything that we just talked about that's bad about BRI, inactivity, inaction would be even worse. But thankfully, that doesn't have to be the decision today.
Yeah.
The decision today can be to not invest in something that's a bad idea, to save that money for other ideas that could work better in the future, things like the EU connectivity plan.
Opportunity cost all the way.
Yep.
That's what I love about it.
Again, you're not saying spend that money there instead. You're saying save that money so you have the option to spend it somewhere else.
Exactly. Don't do this because that takes out all the other options.
Yep.
That may not have the same harms. Yeah. If you have any questions about how to run alternatives, as always, ask us about it. Email us, comment on this, whatever you want to do.
And if there's enough demand based on the response from people curious about alternative arguments, we could probably even try to make a special small episode
we could
with
probably do that.
some better examples, just on some simple stuff like gummy bears versus hard candy or something like that. Just like really, really basic
just to
topics.
Or I could find some old stuff that we ran alternatives on.
That would work too. We could also use it. I mean, we could do both.
Yeah.
Like really basic elementary level argumentation also alongside old real debate topics.
Right. Yeah, I think that'd be fun.
If that's something you want, let us know. Hit us up on Twitter or email us directly at...
Are you waiting for me to say?
Yeah, because I don't know any of the handles.
Email is CandorDebateCo@gmail.com. Twitter is at CandorBriefs or at Former Partners. Both exist. We have a Facebook page. I'm thinking about actually doing something with it. It's Candor Debate Co. We have a subreddit if you use Reddit. It's just Candor Debate. Same as the website, CandorDebate.com. Don't forget to download the Recency mobile app for iPhone. It's going to be great.
Please do. It will be a really good way for us to see what kind of interest we're generating within the community as well.
You know, at the very least, it's a great timer.
It is.
And if you're looking for a good timer, you know, it's got this really cool visual effect where the color of the screen changes from green to red gradually. So you can just glance at your phone and get a visual representation of what kind of time you have left in your speech. It gives you the list of speeches and takes you to the next speech automatically when one speech finishes. It's really cool.
It's as far as I know, it's the only timer that's actually set up to work for debate.
Yeah.
It's not like there are other timers that give you the ability to set multiple timers in a row that have different lengths.
Well, there's debate timers on the App Store.
Well, but I don't think there are very many like that though, or if any.
Well, not like ours.
Where it's already set up with the speech times, it goes through it automatically for you.
Yeah, not automatically.
This one's a lot more streamlined than the others.
I think it's cool. If you use it and you have some issues with it, let us know as well.
Yeah, we have a tech guy.
Yeah, we do.
And he rocks.
Shout out to Andrew for building that app.
Andrew, we love you, boy. You're awesome.
So yeah, check out this brief if you're interested in it. We usually do a discount for listening to the podcast. Sadly, with the new website, we don't have a way to set up discounts yet. That's something we're working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
So as of now, the brief is full price. But if you listen to the podcast and you're used to getting the brief for $5 off like usual, shoot me an email at CandorDebateCo@gmail.com, and we'll work something out to you that discount like we usually do. There's just no way to put a discount code in on the website right now.
We also don't have a good discount code for today. We didn't really get tangential with too many things. Mindhunter?
We didn't talk at all.
I know,
about
that's what I'm
Mindhunter.
saying. Like that could be the discount code because that's the only thing.
We talked about something.
Modern Warfare.
Cole.
Cole.
Yeah.
Discount code Cole.
Yeah.
That's COAL, not your name.
Unless your name is Cole, and you can email me and say, hey, my name is Cole, and I'll do it for that.
Yeah, and we'll give it to you for free. Not really.
Hey, whoa.
Not really.
No, but for real, email us if you do want that $5 off. Hopefully in the future we'll have that way to put in discount codes.
It shouldn't be too difficult.
I know we will. It's just something that we can't have set up tonight, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all the arguments. The brief is great for this month. We're going to be releasing release 2 in the next few days, hopefully, maybe the next week. If you're interested in cutting cards for Candor with us, whether that be Public Forum or Lincoln Douglas or Policy, or you know somebody that would be, shoot us an email at CandorDebateCo@gmail.com. We are looking for more people to work with us, more contributors, more researchers.
This would not be any sort of contractual obligation, nor would you be permanently expected to work with us. You could do it for 1 month's worth of topics, and we would appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, we're just looking for an extra hand on it. We've been doing some expansion, and things are getting out from under us just a little bit, enough that we're looking for some more people. So
But as long as I stop being lazy, I think we'll be able to get that back under
It's
control.
all Lucas's fault.
I mean, I'd say it's more than half my fault.
I don't know if I'd put that much on you. But either way, we're looking to take care of it. If you know somebody that wants to help us, or if you want to help us, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you for listening so much. This has been episode 1 of season 2 of the Former Partners podcast. I'm Quentin.
And I am Lucas.
Thank you. Oh, wait, what do I always say? Oh my gosh, it's been so long. I say thanks, enjoy, and good luck.